Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with Mike Simmons. Mike, it's always good to be back with you.
Jody, it is always good to be back with you. You know, actually, I know that when we have a call scheduled, you make it to those calls. So thanks for being consistent.
Well, that is one thing, consistent and punctual. I learned that from one of the best, I think.
Yep. And I know Lee just continues to harp on that over and over again. So consistent and punctual. Nice work.
Yes. Well, Mike, in the past, we talked about blind spots. I know that was an episode we had some good comments on, and we realized that there are a lot of problems that people that we work with continue to run into. So, Mike, wouldn't you say that as you work with different companies, there are certain problems that you see, no matter the size of the organization, that creep in there?
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, what's interesting is many of them think they're the only ones running into the problem.
Oh, no, I hadn't thought of that. Well, so then it's good to know that other people are running into the problem. And you who work across different organizations, you have a good insight into that because you see it, which led us to the idea to put together a series on the problems that we see organizations run into. And blind spots was the first one. Now, this is the second one in that series of problems. We're going to talk about defining expectations, creating a plan, adapting the plan, essentially planning, but different aspects of it. So, Mike, get us started. Let's talk about planning.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that organizations run into, and again, these are just patterns that we recognize across each of the clients that we've had a chance to work with, and some of the prospects that we've had a chance to work with them. Either we decided not to work with them, or they decided not to work with us. So there are a couple of different ways on that, on how something like that goes. But when it comes to planning, I think one of the biggest gaps that organizations have is being very clear about what their expectations are. What are the desired outcomes? What are the objectives? And many times organizations overcomplicate these things. They want a little bit of this, and they want a little bit of this, and they want some of this. And ultimately what that brings up is that challenge of focus. They try to do too much. Another challenge that they run into as it relates to expectations is speed. You know, many of the organizations we work with, they could have been struggling with their speed to which they're trying to generate revenue. They could have gone through a couple of VPs of sales. They may have been on their third hire and are wondering why they're not seeing different results. I think when Ryan Carson was on, we talked a little bit about some of the challenges he ran into when it came to hiring that first sales rep, and some of the challenges of you being able to make sure that rep was being supported. They were delivering the right information to their customer base. They understood how customers buy. So when it comes to planning, gets to be beginning with the end in mind and being very clear on what your general expectations are. And once you've been able to define those expectations, and I think you've got to be really careful here because the expectations of a CEO and a founder might be different than the expectations of a VP of operations, a VP of marketing, a VP of customer experience, VP of whatever, or head of whatever, or director of whatever, or just person who carries many of those hats. So having those discussions with people around what their expectations are and where their challenges are extremely important.
So we have clear expectations in place. That helps us create the plan because you've got to know where you want to go in order to plan for it. So talk to us about that next step, creating the plan.
Yeah. So there's a lot of junk out there related to whether or not design thinking works. And I'll put myself in the camp of I'm not schooled in design thinking, but I am practiced in taking that approach. And what I mean there is once we understand what our objectives are, then we start to design backward and say, how do we get to that space? So if our goal is to increase sales by 30% over a 12-month period, let's go out to that 12-month period and see what needs to happen. What are some of the gates that we need to go through in order to get to that 30% increase? That could be one gate is you actually start to see more pipeline built into your CRM. That pipeline could come from growth within an existing customer base. It could come from identifying a new customer base. It could come from expanding into new markets or building relationships with partners. There's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing it. But once I've identified what the goal is, and we've got a number or something that we're looking for that will help us determine what the end success is, then we start designing backward to say, here are the gates we need to go through in order to determine whether or not we're successful. And it would work all the way back. And in the past, when we've talked about planning, I think we've talked about driving from Phoenix to Orange County. If we're going to make the drive from Phoenix to Orange County, there's a couple of ways that you can get there. One way is to go way up north, up to Flagstaff, and take I-40 west and go through a couple of cities. In that case, you'd have to go through Barstow before you make it down to Orange County. It's not ideal. If you leave from Phoenix directly, you can go straight out on I-10, and you know that you have to go through Blythe. If you don't make it through Blythe and you're on I-10, you're going the wrong way. If you want to go down through San Diego, you may go out on 8, go through Yuma, and then El Centro, and get through San Diego. And now you've got these guideposts that you're going to go through to help determine success. The plan, as we look at it, is about identifying what those guideposts are, identifying the timing for which we expect to go through those guideposts. And now we have something that we can use to evaluate and measure against when we start to determine, is our plan working? Are the activities that we're doing actually helping us execute against that plan?
The third step that you gave us is adapting the plan. So if we went through all the trouble to create this plan, why is adapting the plan so important? You gave it to us as the third step.
I forget if this is the Customato quote or Mike Tyson. I've attributed it to Mike Tyson, but I've read some stuff out there where it gets attributed to Customato. But it's, what is it? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face or punched in the mouth, right? It's great to have a plan, but if you are so beholden to that plan that you're not willing to adapt and adjust based on the information you gather while you're in theater or while you're in combat or while you're in the process of actually executing on that plan, then you've created a significant level of risk. Let's use that example when we're driving from Phoenix to Orange County. If we find out there's a freeway closure someplace on I-10 and it is going to prevent us from being able to go through that route and it's going to delay us for a couple of hours, we might need to adapt our plan, adjust, head south and go through San Diego. So always be okay with the idea that your plan is philosophical. It will never be perfect. You will have to adapt, and you should adapt and iterate based on new information. I think when Dave Burke was on here, we talked about the OODA loop. We talked about the importance of observing, orienting, decide, and then take action. And then that loops around. So think about that in your planning process. Know that although you've got these best laid plans of mice and men, you've got these best laid plans, there are some adjustments that you're going to need to make because there are some assumptions that you make around how business will take place. There are some blind spots that you have that will become more clear or make themselves apparent as you dig into the discussion. You've got to be prepared to adjust. And you've got to have the confidence in your team to help you with those adjustments. If everybody understands that commander's intent or understands the general objectives of where the organization's going, how we're measuring success, how we're defining success, what our ultimate objective is, it's a lot easier to get feedback from the team on ways that you can adjust, iterate, and optimize.
I like that quote about getting punched in the face. It's very striking about planning that something is going to happen to knock that plan out of the window. I'm going to talk more about that, but I'm just curious, Mike, have you ever been punched in the face?
I've been punched in the face many times. Even sometimes where I don't remember getting punched in the face, but we won't go that path. If you'd like to hear that story, let's connect with me offline.
Yes, I am not going to ask any details about getting punched in the face, but I just like that because if you take it in that context of a boxing match, you can do all that training and study the other fighter so much and do push-ups and work the bag, but none of that matters so much once you get punched in the face because it rattles you, it changes things, and you've got to react. And
well, think about the movie. What was in the movie Rocky, where Rocky's fighting Apollo and Mick wants him to change from southpaw to a conventional fighting stance. So go from a left-handed fighter to a traditional right-handed fighter, and how that changed Apollo's plan. So, and then you get into, and I know now we're talking about movies, right? But get into the discussion that Dave talked about, and we'll include a link to the Dave Burke podcast, but which is also one of the more popular podcasts we've had this year. And we'll work to get Dave on here again later on in the year. But he talked about getting inside someone's loop. If the competition is working to get inside your loop, what are the things that you're doing on your end to continue to adjust your loop so that they don't have the ability to get inside your loop? And if you're following that same plan over and over and over again, and you're not adjusting it, then it's easy for people to kind of predict how you're attacking or approaching something.
This potentially could open up a bigger conversation, because thinking back about Dave's conversation and then in my training as a law enforcement officer, there are times when you purposely do want to disrupt things, the other person, and you often get disrupted in what you think will happen. And that's when you fall back on the training and the practice that you have. Even though we may not get into it today, I think planning, preparation also involves practice, because when you do get disrupted in your plan, that's usually what you fall back to. The highest level of practice and preparation you have done, that's what you end up doing when you get disrupted.
Yeah, what's the saying? You trust your training, and most of the training is based on, I would expect, is based on fundamentals. I know that's the training that we do. We focus on the fundamentals of sales to help you perform better. And when I say fundamentals of sales, that's not objection handling techniques. That's not 5 quick ways to help close the business. It's not that kind of stuff. It's about how do you ask the right questions to get to the root of the challenge and the problem that people are having. And then how do you work to put your solution in the context of that problem and how it would address that problem? So planning is important. Having those fundamentals in place, having that foundation is critical. You could have this great plan on top of a very weak foundation and you're going to be in trouble. But if you have a plan on top of a solid foundation, you've always got something that you can come back to or when the situation changes. And a good example would be getting punched in the mouth. I don't know. How many times have you been punched in the mouth when you were a park ranger?
Well, no incidences that led to a punch in the mouth while on duty. But in the academy, that was one of the things they said, look, if we're going to train you how to fight, you also have to know how to get punched in the head. So they took us individually into a back room. They never told us why individually. I suspect it was in case we cried or said mommy, something like that. And they put the headgear on you and then just hauled off and punched you in the head. So it's happened in training, and it's happened a lot as a hockey player. So I've been punched in the head my share of times.
So why do they do that, though? Like, why do they put you through that situation?
Well, we spend so much time learning how to fight, learning defensive tactics, learning grappling, learning how to take you down and handcuff you. But there could be a time where someone just punches you in the head and you don't expect it. You don't see it coming. But what are you going to do when that happens? You think in your head, this is the plan I'm going to do. This is what I have to do to get this person in the handcuffs. But that, like Mike Tyson said, that changes when you get punched in the head. What do you do next? From there, it's a reaction. And is your reaction going to be saying mommy and holding your head? Or is your reaction going to be to fall back on your training? So here's another example I'll give. It doesn't involve getting punched in the face, but in the academy, we have to get sprayed directly in the eyes with pepper spray. And there's more involved in it than that. But for this purpose, I'll just say that we get sprayed directly in the eyes with pepper spray. Then there was a time in the field, and it's horrible. It's as bad as you think it would be. But there was a time in the field I was involved in an incident where we pepper sprayed somebody, and then getting him in handcuffs, I got pepper spray on my hands, and then without realizing it touched my face, which then put pepper spray in my eyes. Had I never experienced that, if that was my first time and I was out in the field on an incident arresting somebody, and that was the first time I had to deal with that pain, it really would have disrupted me. And I don't know what would have happened. But I had been through it already, and I knew just getting a little bit in my eyes wasn't near as bad as the direct spray. So that's what I also compare it to that, because I did not like getting pepper sprayed in the academy, but it sure did help once it happened out in the field and I got pepper spray in my eyes. It allowed me to still operate. And yeah, there was discomfort and pain, but I knew what to expect and I could get through it.
Well, and first, as you were telling the story, I thought of when I was making salsa not that long ago. It might have been a couple months ago, but I had added some habaneros into some diced habanero peppers into the salsa. And then before completely washing my hands, I had touched my eyes, and the level of pain and burning that I had from that was a very good reminder that when adding habanero peppers to salsa, probably makes sense to throw up some gloves. Granted, not the same as pepper spray. Fortunately, I've never been in a position where I've been pepper sprayed.
Well, we can arrange that if it would help.
Well, and just to go with how my mind works, we had some friends, a friend who is a canine officer, and I wanted to go out. I still may do this at some point in time, but for whatever reason, I want to go out there, put on the padded suit, and get attacked by the dog just to see what happens. I like to feel the sheer power of something like that. But I think which gets into a whole nother set of issues. But I think as we go through this discussion and we start talking about the expectations, the planning, then the adapting the plan, there are a couple of key pieces here. One, that you don't know until you know. You don't know until you've been in that scenario. And no matter how you go through your planning process, where you try to think through every scenario that's going to work out, there are going to be times where you will come across a scenario that will surprise you. And you've got to be able to go back to that training, get back to the fundamentals. But as you go through and you do this and you have more experience, you start to identify patterns and ways that you can adjust to those situations. So all of these discussions, all of these interactions, whether you're talking with a client or you're working with a colleague or you're working with an organization like our organization, should be looked at as additional brushstrokes on a painting, things that should provide more clarity to the organization's focus and clarity to how the organization is going to execute, understanding that there will be times where things move really fast and there are times where things are going to move a little bit slower. And I think one of the other challenges we run into with many organizations is everybody wants to move fast. And many times the question I'll follow up with is, okay, I know you've wanted to move fast, but how has that been working out for you so far?
That's a good question. So again, you mentioned the 3 steps: defining expectations, creating a plan, adapting a plan. Wrap this in a nice bow for us about sales, how this applies to us in sales and the work that we do.
Well, so we've talked about it a little bit on the territory planning episode, but I'm going to walk through some of those things. So let's just say that our objective is to grow the business by 30%. And in order to be able to do that, let's say we need to generate an additional $10 million over a period of time, whatever that period of time is. Could be, if it's 30% inside a 3-day period, you're going to be in trouble. If it's 30% over the course of a 12-month period, depending on your business, that might be attainable. If it's 30% and that growth is $10 million, it might be attainable. If it's 30% over a couple of year period, then you take a slightly different approach. But the first piece is figuring out what that objective is and getting everybody to buy into that objective, how things will be measured. Then you work backwards and you start to say, okay, in order to get to that number, get to that objective, I can do that through a couple of different variables. I can either increase the amount of money that we're generating within our existing customer base. I can increase the number of customers that we're working with. So this could be new customer acquisition. Within new customer acquisition, I can either do that directly or I can do that by working with partners, leveraging a relationship that partners might already have with customers of theirs as an entry point. I can evaluate whether or not either of those approaches makes more sense. There's risk in either of them. In working with partners, you're giving away a bit more of your margin, but you might accelerate your growth. And we talked about that in the past about working with resellers. So then you kind of figure out, okay, here are the buckets that we're going to work within. Then you start to say, here are the tactical things that we're going to do to help drive business in each of those areas. If it's about new customer acquisition, maybe it's a targeted account plan for our top 25 or 50 or 100 prospects. If it is a bit more transactional than that, maybe it's about investing on the marketing side to help drive business. But now you start to look at those tactical items. And this is where you start to get into KPIs, some of the metrics that you want to keep track of to evaluate success. As you look at those metrics, be honest with yourself. One, are they the right metrics? Two, how are you performing against those metrics? And if things aren't performing, be comfortable in adjusting the plan, adapting the plan to make shifts or make changes. And those changes could be maybe moving from a new customer acquisition model that's focused on direct to a new customer acquisition model that's focused on working with resellers. Or maybe the focus is on improving the functionality of an existing product rather than adding in new functionality to that product. And so there's a number of different ways to go after it, but to tighten this up and bring it back to the point, set a goal, be clear on what that goal is, set some measurable items that will, or set a plan that will help you, or measurable items that will help build toward that goal, set a plan that will help you execute against those measurable items, and then be prepared to address that plan based on what you actually see in the marketplace.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. If we have any questions about planning or anything related to sales, where can we find you at?
Well, the easiest place to find us is at Catalyst Sale on Twitter or hello@catalystsale.com via email. You can go to our website, which is catalystsale.com. We've got a Facebook page, so we're out there. Just engage with us in the community, reference to Catalyst Sale, and if you do that, we'll likely find you. And I want to use this as a point to help thank everybody for the work that they've done out there in spreading the word of the podcast. We continue to bring on new listeners. You all tend to stay with us, so I think we must be delivering some good content out there. We're interested in hearing about the topics and concepts that you'd like us to talk about. Also interested in your recommendations on guests. So thank you for sharing the podcast. Thank you for providing your ratings on the podcast. Thank you for reviewing the podcast. And thank you for your engagement.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.